Today I want to talk about Sonic games, and not just any Sonic game, a Sonic game without Sonic. What even is a Sonic? Well, for starters, what would define a Sonic game without Sonic in it? Well, he can't be in the game itself, not even mentioned, not even on the box art. Nope, 0% Sonic. No Sonic at all. Well then, what would make it a Sonic game if it can't have Sonic in it? For all the people living under a rock, Sonic has these things called friends. So if you want a Sonic game without Sonic physically in it, it has to feature one of these characters and not Sonic himself. Well, let's start off on the Genesis, Ground Zero. Well, he would probably be in these ones, probably not in this one, and most definitely not in this one. The only real non-Sonic game that is part of the Sonic series on the Genesis would technically be Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. Now you could argue that Mean Bean Machine is just a repackaging of Puyo Puyo, just with the Robotnik face plastered over it. But people do consider this to be part of the Sonic series, so technically it counts. It's called Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine after all. This is a similar case for Knuckles Chaotix on the 32X, with Knuckles being the star of the game, along with a plethora of other characters. However, Sonic does show up in the credits of the game alongside Tails, so should it really count? Well, he's not really, playable in the game, so I'll give it a pass. Before development of Knuckles Chaotix started, a demo used to pitch the core gameplay mechanic of the Ring of Bond ability was made internally at Sega, known as Sonic Crackers. Sonic Crackers features an early version of the Ring Bond mechanic, a more janky one at best. The player controlled Sonic and Tails around 4 different levels, also known as attractions in Chaotix itself. There are actually 37 total attractions featured in the game, with 4 being accessible from the title screen, and the others seemingly being non-functionable. The Ring of Bond mechanic featured in the game seems to be pretty close to the final version used in Chaotix, with it being cleaned up in the final version, along with a button to recall your partner if they ever get stuck somewhere. The 2-player mode featured in the game lets a second player control Tails, but it seems Tails lacks the ability to fly and functions the same as Sonic. Hazards are absent from the levels, with there being no way to die. Even going out of bounds can kill you. Well, actually, spikes are present in the game, and touching them causes you to lose rings, even though there aren't any rings present in the game to collect at any point. Touching spikes repeatedly makes the player dizzy, but is still not able to kill you. You can, however, time out the levels. If you wait for about 3 minutes, the level seemingly ends, but still doesn't really kill you. Other than the spikes, the only objects that you can interact with in-game are springs, which function like springs. The game also features these overhead field areas, which were probably intended to act as a world map of some sorts, probably similar to Super Mario World. You can control Sonic and Tails using the Ring of Bond, but they don't have the same physics as they do in the levels themselves. You can hold the A button to halt Tails from moving, which allows you to move anywhere you want. The fields don't have any collision built into them, which allows you to go anywhere on screen. Anyway, let's talk about some Sonic games without Sonic. Would this count? If you put your Sonic 2 cartridge onto your Sonic & Knuckles cartridge, using the power of lock-on technology, you could play Sonic 2 but with Knuckles. There are actually some differences between this version of Sonic 2 and regular old Sonic 2, like the title card palettes being changed to fit Knuckles' color palette, and returning your rings after exiting a special stage, unlike a normal Sonic 2, where you lose your rings after exiting a special stage. Now, at its core, it is still Sonic 2, but you play as Knuckles. You could argue that it still has the word Sonic on the title screen, or the game was designed for Sonic, but Sonic isn't in the game anywhere, so technically it should count. Anyway, other than Knuckles, Tails has also received some games of his own, with both being on the Game Gear. Tails Sky Patrol and Tails Adventures would both be released on the Sega Game Gear in 1995, with Sky Patrol only being released in Japan, and Adventures being released in Japan and in the US. Tails Sky Patrol's gameplay mostly takes place in the air in a flying state, with Tails being equipped with a ring that can be used as a projectile or latch onto stuff. It's pretty simple, really. Tails joins the Sky Patrol to save an island from Witch Cart, who would go on to be featured in some of the Archie Sonic comics and the IDW comics. Tails' Adventures, on the other hand, mostly takes place on the ground, playing more like a puzzle platformer than a regular Sonic game, and it's slow. The gameplay revolves around Tails collecting items and platforming, although you can use the items you collect from past levels to use in future levels, adding a strategic element to the collecting and equipping items, since you can only use so many in a singular level, adding a memorization factor to the gameplay. The items you can collect range from helpful tools to giving you powers. For example, a bomb item can be thrown at enemies to defeat them, and barriers to progress in the levels. The items I find the most interesting are these items based off of other characters in the Sonic series, such as Fang the Sniper, Knuckles, and Sonic. The Fang item increases chances of enemies dropping rings when defeated, the Knuckles item lets you punch stuff, and the Sonic item lets you do a spin dash. Even though it has Sonic's face on it, I don't think this item would make this game a Sonic positive game, since it doesn't directly feature him. I think of it more as a small cameo than anything. These two Game Gear games wouldn't be actually the only games to feature Tails in them. No, because Tails in the Music Maker has it beat. Tails in the Music Maker was released for the Sega Pico, also known as the Kids Communication Pico in Japan. It was Sega's take on a video game system aimed for younger audiences, aka little babies. The Pico was actually the first ever game system to use touch controls as the main control scheme. The thing actually lasted a little while, with it first releasing in 1993 and support ending for it around late 2005 in Japan. Anyway, Tails in the Music Maker first released in 1994 in the US and in 1995 in Japan. The whole game's shtick is to learn about scales, tempo, rhythm, etc. The minigames are separated by pages, as the Pico was sort of an electronic book hybrid. Page 2 includes a platforming minigame taking place in Green Hill. Page 3 includes a pinball minigame. Page 4 includes a breakout type minigame. Page 5 includes some sort of instrumental matching game. And page 6 is just drawing and hey, Sonic is here. Okay, I think it's time to look at some more obscure stuff. In January of 2001, Sonic Team would create an internet portal by the name of Sonic Cafe, which they used to distribute games for Japanese mobile phones at the time. Sonic Cafe would continuously be updated until December 1st, 2007, when the portal was closed after being merged with Sega Ages to form Puyo Puyo Sega, basically just a rebranded Sonic Cafe with more games. Service for Puyo Puyo Sega would close in March of 2022. A new game would launch on the Sonic Cafe service every month. More miscellaneous content would also be distributed through Sonic Cafe, such as images and ringtones, but let's just focus on the games. A ton of games would be released for Cafe, with there only being a handful of Sonic-related games released too. Around 37 Sonic games would be released, with only a handful of them featuring characters besides Sonic. These games would include Amy's American Page 1, Shadow Shoot, Eggman no Kazute Panic, Tails no Flying It, and Nakayoshi Chow. Amy's American Page 1 was a game based off of the Japanese card game American Page 1. I won't explain how the game works since that would take forever though, but Sonic Retro describes it as a mix of Uno and Crazy 8s, so if you're Japanese or have ever played this game, would you say this is accurate? Anyway, you play as Amy competing against Rouge, Cream, and a hero Chow. Would have made more sense if it was big, but I digress. The game was first released in 2005 for the iMode 505i, and would continue to see releases on different phones in the coming years, with the most recent one being in 2008 for the Club Air Edge. Shadow Shoot would also be released in Sonic Cafe in the year 2006. The game revolves around Eggman stealing the Chaos Emeralds and Shadow going to take them back from him. The gameplay is an auto-scroller type, with Shadow being able to move from left to right. You can attack enemies by using the spin jump attack, or by shooting them with your handgun, basically making this the successor to Shadow the Hedgehog on the GameCube. At the end of each level you fight a boss. The levels themselves aren't too long, mostly taking around 30 seconds to a minute it looks like. Besides that, it's a pretty short game, taking around 20 minutes to complete. Eggman no Kazuate Panic was released in 2002, and revolved around Tails defusing bombs laid by Eggman by using cryptic clues given to you. If the time runs out, the bombs explode, ending the game. The plot of this game is somewhat similar to a plotline of Tails' story in Sonic Adventure, which might have been the inspiration for the game. The gameplay is somewhat similar to the board game Mastermind, but with, a Sonic skin. Not too much information exists about this game, as a lot of these games are actually lost media, or partially found, as Sonic Cafe was a limited mobile service only in Japan, so things are odd to get lost. Tails No Flying It would be released in December of 2003. The game is based off of the Tails Flying It minigame from Sonic Battle on the Game Boy Advance. The game revolves around Tails needing to collect 20 rings as fast as possible. If you hit a bomb, you lose 5 rings, slowing down your progress and netting you a worse time. It's a pretty simple premise, with not that much substance to it. The last non-Sonic Sonic Cafe game that will be released was Nakayoshi Chow, a virtual game based off of the Chow Garden from the Sonic Adventure games. The gameplay is pretty simple. You can pet your Chow, talk to your Chow, and interact with it. If you interact with your Chow a lot, the room in which the Chow lives in becomes decorated with wallpapers from the Sonic Cafe website. Now, with these games primarily being on early to late 2000s Japanese phones, you can imagine these games not being that, good to play really. I mean, does it look easy to play on games on a thing like this? Not really, but could you imagine playing a game on something like this? Throughout 2003, there were 2 different McDonald's promotions where you could receive these LCD games with an order of a Happy Meal. There were 14 different LCD games released during the US promotion, with more being released in other countries too. The first wave of these would include 6 different games, and the second wave of these would include 8 different games. Now, these LCD games aren't too crazy or anything, they're more similar in comparison to the Tiger LCD games, although being way cheaper feeling. I don't feel like going super in depth with these, since these are literally just cheap LCD games, so let's do a little lightning round. The first games we'll take a look at are the Amy and Rouge games, Amy and Rouge Tennis and Amy and Rouge Volleyball. Interestingly, the volleyball version of the game would be repackaged as the tennis version of the game, basically making these the same games, just with different presents. Next up are the Knuckles games, Knuckles Baseball, Knuckles Soccer, and Knuckles Treasure Hunt. It seems that Knuckles Baseball wouldn't see a release in all countries, and it will be replaced by a totally new Knuckles game. It also seems that Knuckles Soccer is just a reskinned version of the already existing Tails Soccer, just with Knuckles, basically making it the better version of the game. Next up we have the Shadow games, Shadow Basketball, Shadow Grinder, and Shadow Hockey. Again, we have some repackaging, with hockey being re-released as Shadow Basketball. Pretty common thing with these LCD games, it seems. Here are the Tails games, Tails Sky Adventure, Tails Sky Patrol, and Tails Soccer. Even though they share the same name, Tails Sky Patrol is not a port of the Sky Patrol on Game Gear, although it seems that they share somewhat similar gameplay, just dumbed down for the LCD game. Lastly, we have Big's Fishing and Cream's Flower Catch. Nothing much to say about them, but I really like the look of the Cream LCD game, being the most unique out of most of these games. Here's Big's Fishing too, I guess. Yeah, let's move on from the LCD games and talk about some games from the arcade. Surprisingly, there aren't that many arcade games that don't feature Sonic in them, which makes sense. I mean, would an arcade cabinet that featured, I don't know, the Animal Buddy Rocky make that many quarters? I don't know. And that's odd considering that one probably existed at one point. Okay, so I ended up discovering these 2 arcade games which feature the Animal Buddies. Yes, the Animal Buddies as the main stars of the games. The thing is, there's seemingly no information about these outside of this post from the Sonic Retro forums. The 2 games went by the name of Air Circus and Curling Holiday. Air Circus would prominently feature Rocky, and Curling Holiday would feature Pecky, the penguin. These 2 games would allegedly release sometime between April 1993 to March 1994. Now, little to no documentation exists of these games, aside from a few flyers which advertise these games. These are probably the only high quality photos of these games we'll ever get, unless they still exist somewhere, which I doubt. Aside from that, Air Circus and Curling Holiday can actually be seen in the background of an episode of Game Cadillac 2. Game Cadillac 2 is a Japanese video game magazine television show that aired from October 1994 to March 1998. The show revolved around introducing and reviewing different games at the time, such as console and PC games. Game Catalog 2 would be the successor of Famitsu Game Catalog, which would only last for a short period of time, being almost immediately replaced by Game Catalog 2. Game Catalog 2 would seemingly run for 5 seasons, with a total of 204 episodes, lasting much longer than Famitsu Game Catalog. There would be 2 other shows that would succeed Game Catalog 2, of these being Game Wave and Game Break, which these shows seemingly having the same premise as the 2 other shows. Okay, what was the premise of this video about again? Sonic games without Sonic? Well, there certainly are a ton of them. There were probably even some ones that were too obscure for me to talk about, or just forgot about them like a complete idiot, which is probably most likely the case. Anyway, sorry for not uploading for like 2 months. I had an original script I was working with, but it sucked. So I ended up doing this one instead. And I had to deal with some real life stuff, so I guess you could say I was pretty busy. But in all seriousness, I promise not to leave for another 2 months, as I want to start doing these videos on a more consistent basis, but who knows really. Anyway, follow me on Twitter at @It'sAnthonyYT. I update on there sometimes if you're interested about what I'm up to. Hope you've learned something from this video, and maybe even something about yourself.